Twin girls cry at their mother's grave. The millionaire, when he sees their faces, he starts to cry. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Thunder crashed across the dark sky, rattling the enormous windows of Adrian Cole's mansion. Inside, the billionaire sat motionless in his leather armchair, loosely holding a crystal glass of whiskey. The only light came from the crackling fireplace, casting long shadows over the expensive furniture. He barely noticed the storm raging outside. Lately everything seemed distant, muffled, as if he were watching life through thick glass. The mansion, despite its grandeur, felt as empty as it had for the past 7 years. Since Emily, Adrian took another sip of whiskey, letting the familiar burn chase away thoughts of blue eyes and gentle smiles. The memories always hurt more during storms. Emily had loved storms, used to drag him outside to dance in the rain, her laughter brighter than any sunshine. Now there was only silence. Lightning illuminated the room with intense white, the thunder that followed so loud it made the crystal chandelier tinkle softly. Adrian's fingers tightened around his glass as he stared into the flames, trying to lose himself in their hypnotic dance. The sudden buzz of the intercom broke his isolation. "Mr. Cole," James's voice, his head of security, sounded through the speaker. "Sir, I apologize for interrupting, but there are 2 children at the main gate." Adrian's eyebrows furrowed. "Children?" "Yes, sir. 2 little girls, appear to be twins." "At this hour? In this weather?" Adrian placed his glass on the table harder than necessary. "Where are their parents?" "Unknown, sir. They're alone." Adrian stood up, irritation breaking through his usual apathy. He didn't deal with people anymore, especially children. His staff knew this. "Call the police." James hesitated. "Sir, they're soaked and seem terrified. The smaller one is crying." Adrian ran his hand over his face. He didn't want to get involved. He'd spent years carefully building walls around himself, keeping the world and its complicated emotions at a distance. And yet, "Fine," he muttered. "I'll handle it." He grabbed an umbrella from the stand near the door, though he hardly cared about getting wet. The rain hit him as soon as he stepped onto the covered porch driven by the wind. Lightning cut across the sky again as he descended the long driveway toward the ornate iron gates. On the other side, 2 small figures clung to the bars. They couldn't be more than 6 or 7 years old, their clothes completely drenched, long hair stuck to their faces. As Adrian approached, they looked at him with identical expressions of desperation. And then he saw their eyes. Blue, exactly the shade of cornflowers in summer. Emily's eyes. Something in his chest contracted painfully. He stopped a few meters from the gate, unable to move closer, unable to look away. The resemblance was striking, impossible. His mind must be playing tricks on him. "Please, sir," one of the girls whispered, voice trembling from cold and fear. "Mommy won't wake up." The words cut through Adrian's paralysis. Without thinking, he began to move, punching in the gate code with fingers that felt numb. As soon as the gates started to open, he removed his expensive coat. "Where is she?" He demanded, wrapping the coat around the 2 little girls. They were so small that the coat covered them like a blanket. "Your mother, where is she?" The girls huddled together beneath the coat, their small bodies trembling. The one who had spoken, he noticed she wore a small butterfly clip in her hair, pointed toward the trees that lined his property. "In the car," she said. "We tried to wake her, but she wouldn't move. Belle got scared." She hugged her sister closer. "I'm Daisy. I remembered seeing your lights through the trees, so we came for help." Adrian's heart pounded hard against his ribs. These children with their familiar eyes and delicate features. He pushed the thought away. It wasn't possible. Emily was gone. "Show me," he said, his voice harsher than intended. The girls grabbed his hands without hesitation, their small, cold fingers against his skin. They pulled him away from the safety of the gates and into the storm. The rain beat down mercilessly as they followed the path through the trees, branches whipping in the wind. Adrian should have been questioning this. should have been more cautious about following two strange children into the darkness. But something drove him forward. Instinct, perhaps, or something deeper he didn't want to examine too closely. The girls led him down a narrow dirt path, now muddy from the rain. Their grip on his hands never loosened, as if they feared he might disappear if they let go. Despite their size, they moved with determination, clearly knowing where they were going. There! Daisy pointed ahead, where headlights weakly cut through the rain and trees. An old sedan was partially hidden among the foliage, its front end resting against a large oak tree. The impact didn't look severe, but Adrian's heart raced. As they approached, the driver's door was ajar, and through the rain he could make out a figure slumped in the seat. "Mommy hasn't moved since the car stopped." Belle spoke for the first time, her voice so soft Adrian could barely hear it over the storm. "We tried shaking her, but..." Adrian gently squeezed their hands and then released them. "Stay here," he ordered, already walking toward the car. Water streamed into his eyes, but he barely noticed, his attention entirely focused on the unconscious woman in the driver's seat. When he reached the car door, lightning illuminated the interior once more. Adrian's world stopped. The woman's head was resting on the steering wheel, her long, dark hair falling forward, hiding her face. But he knew that hair, knew the delicate curve of her neck, the small scar on her right hand that held the wheel. He had traced that scar with his fingers thousands of times, listening to her laugh as she told the story of how she got it trying to rescue a cat from a tree when she was 12. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. His hands trembled as he reached out to brush the hair from her face. The windshield wipers worked furiously against the downpour as Adrian's Bentley cut through the dark streets. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. In the rearview mirror, he kept catching glimpses of the twins huddled in the back seat, their small forms wrapped in his coat. They looked so much like her that it hurt to breathe. Daisy leaned slightly forward, protective even in her exhaustion, with one arm around her sister. Belle had finally stopped crying, her head resting on Daisy's shoulder. Their identical blue eyes met his in the mirror each time he looked back, and every glance felt like a physical blow. "Turn left here," Daisy quietly indicated, pointing to a neighborhood Adrian hadn't visited in years. The streets grew narrower, the buildings more weathered. Neon signs hummed in the rain, their harsh light reflecting in the puddles forming on the cracked asphalt. Adrian followed their directions mechanically, his mind still reeling from finding Emily unconscious in that car. He had carried her to his car, laying her in the back seat with a gentleness he hadn't displayed in years. The girls had climbed in immediately after, positioning themselves near their mother's head, stroking her hair with small hands. "There," Belle whispered, pointing to a building with peeling paint and a sign that read, "New Hope Women's Shelter." Adrian's chest tightened. The idea of Emily living there, struggling against poverty while he was in his mansion, drowning in wealth and misery, made him physically ill. He pulled the Bentley up to the curb, the car looking ridiculously out of place in front of the dilapidated building. Before he could move, a woman hurried out through the front door of the shelter, running toward him through the rain. Her graying hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore a worn cardigan over practical clothing. "Daisy! Belle!" she called, relief evident in her voice. "We've been so worried." She reached the car just as Adrian stepped out, and her eyes widened at his imposing figure. "Who are you?" she demanded, protective instinct flaring. "Someone who can help," Adrian responded curtly, already opening the rear door. The girls said their mother passed out. He lifted Emily carefully from the back seat, cradling her against his chest. The woman's face softened with concern. "Yes. Emily's been sick for days, but she wouldn't stop working. She collapsed this afternoon while doing laundry. We wanted to call an ambulance, but..." She wrung her hands. "The shelter's funds are limited and Emily doesn't have insurance." Adrian held Emily carefully against his chest. She felt so light, so fragile. Her skin burned with fever where it touched his, and her breathing was shallow and irregular. "Where is she staying?" he demanded. The shelter worker hesitated only for a moment before leading them inside. The interior of the building was clean but modest, with mismatched furniture and walls that hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in years. They climbed a narrow staircase to the second floor, where small rooms lined a dark hallway. The worker opened one of the doors, revealing a tiny space barely large enough for a twin bed. Emily's few possessions were arranged on a small shelf. Some worn clothes, a few children's books, and a weathered picture frame turned face down. Adrian laid Emily gently on the thin mattress, his hand lingering on her cheek. Even gaunt and pale, she was beautiful. His Emily, whom he thought dead and buried for 7 years, had been alive all this time, struggling to survive with their daughters. Their daughters. The thought hit him like a physical blow. "She hasn't woken since she collapsed," the worker said quietly, standing in the doorway. "The fever just keeps getting worse. We're doing what we can, but—" Adrian straightened, decision made. "I'm taking her to my private hospital. Sir, I don't think— This isn't up for discussion." His tone left no room for objections. He lifted Emily again in his arms, her head lolling against his shoulder. "The girls are coming too, I can't just leave them." "Check the records," he interrupted. "Look for Adrian Cole. I'm listed as her emergency contact." He wasn't sure if that was still true after 7 years, but he looked into the worker's eyes with such authority that she hurried to comply. While she checked the files, Daisy and Belle pressed against his legs, their small hands clutching his wet pants. They showed no fear of him, no hesitation. Something in them must have recognized him, just as something in him had recognized them. The worker returned moments later, her eyes wide. You're her husband?" "Yes." The word came out rough, laden with 7 years of pain and anger. "And I'm taking my family home." He brushed past her with Emily secure in his arms, the twins, staying close, practically running to keep up with his long strides. Outside, the storm had intensified, but Adrian barely noticed the rain. He managed to open the rear door of the car without jostling Emily too much, placing her carefully on the seat once more. The girls climbed in without needing to be told, resuming their positions as guardians. Daisy helped Belle with a seatbelt, then fastened her own, their movements showing long practice at taking care of each other. Adrian's hands trembled as he gripped the wheel. Emily was alive. He had daughters. Everything he'd believed for 7 years was a lie. Someone had stolen his family from him, left him to believe they were dead while Emily struggled alone in poverty. The engine roared to life, and Adrian pulled away from the curb. His private hospital was 20 minutes away, equipped with the best doctors money could buy. They would take care of Emily, make her well again. In the rearview mirror, he watched the twins whispering to their unconscious mother, their small hands never leaving her. They looked exhausted but determined, these little girls who had braved a storm to save their mother. His daughters. The thought still seemed surreal. The rain beat hard against the car as Adrian pressed the accelerator, devouring the dark miles between the shelter and help. Emily's breathing remained shallow, each inhalation a struggle. The twins had fallen silent, but their eyes met his in the mirror whenever he checked, full of a trust he didn't deserve but desperately wanted to earn. His grip on the steering wheel tightened as he navigated the wet streets, every fiber of his being focused on getting his family to safety. The white, impersonal walls of Adrian's private medical suite seemed to pulse to the rhythm of the beeping monitors. Through the glass window, he watched doctors and nurses move efficiently around Emily's bed. Their voices were muffled, but the urgent tone carried through the thick glass as they called out medical terms and vital signs. Emily looked incredibly small beneath the tangle of tubes and wires. An oxygen mask covered half her face, fogging slightly with each shallow breath. Her skin was almost as pale as the sheets except for the feverish, unhealthy flush on her cheeks. Adrian clenched his fists at his sides, knuckles white with tension. Every instinct screamed for him to be in there, holding her hand, doing something. But he knew he would only be in the way. Instead, he remained like a sentinel at the window, watching the woman he had once mourned fight for her life. A small sob behind him made him turn. In the large waiting room chairs, Daisy and Belle were huddled together, hands tightly clasped. They looked even smaller in this clinical environment. Two little girls lost trying to be brave. Belle's eyes were red from crying, while Daisy alternated her gaze between Adrian and the window to her mother's room, as if she feared both might disappear. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, overcome with uncertainty. He had no experience with children, had never imagined himself as a father. The last 7 years had made him cold, distant. He didn't know how to comfort these small versions of Emily who looked at him with such desperate hope. But something inside him, something he thought had died with Emily, refused to let him remain aloof to their pain. With careful steps, he approached the chairs. The girls watched him, their identical blue eyes, Emily's eyes, following his movements. "Your mother," he said, his voice rougher than intended, "is getting the best care possible." He crouched down, forcing himself to meet their gaze. "These doctors work for me. They'll do everything they can to help her." Daisy's chin trembled slightly. "Promise?" The word hit Adrian like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had asked him for a promise? When was the last time he had made one? But looking at these little girls, his daughters, he found himself nodding. "I promise." Belle detached herself slightly from her sister. "Can we see her?" "Not yet," Adrian said gently. "The doctors need space to work, but soon." As if on cue, the door to Emily's room opened, and Dr. Sarah Chen emerged, her face serious, but professional. Adrian immediately stood, positioning himself between her and the girls. "Mr. Cole," she began, looking at her tablet. "We've managed to stabilize her condition, but it's serious. Ms. Laurent is suffering from severe malnutrition and dehydration. The pneumonia has progressed significantly due to lack of treatment." She lowered her voice. "If she had spent another night in those conditions, we might have lost her." Adrian's jaw clenched. The idea of how close he had come to losing Emily again made his chest tighten with anger and fear. "But she will recover? With proper care?" "Yes. We've started her on broad-spectrum antibiotics and fluids. The fever is still high, but she's responding to treatment." Dr. Chen's eyes softened as she glanced at the twins. "She's fighting with everything she has." "Can I see her?" "Yes, but only briefly. She needs rest." Adrian nodded, then turned to the girls. "Stay here just a moment. I'll see how your mother is first." They nodded solemnly, and Adrian followed Dr. Chen into Emily's room. The other medical staff had already left, leaving only the steady sound of the monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen. Emily looked somewhat better than she had at the shelter, but she was still terribly ill. Adrian approached the bed slowly, his heart racing. He hadn't been this close to her in 7 years. Even unconscious, her presence filled something in him that had been empty for so long. Carefully, he brushed a damp strand of hair from her forehead. The familiar texture against his fingers brought a flood of memories. Mornings waking up together with her hair spread across the pillow, nights spent holding her, his fingers sliding through the soft strands. The last time he had touched her, at what he thought was his final goodbye. "Why didn't you come back to me?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the machines. "What happened to you, Emily?" As if responding to his voice, Emily's fingers moved slightly on the sheets. A weak moan escaped her lips, muffled by the oxygen mask. Adrian held his breath as her eyelashes fluttered and slowly opened. For a moment she looked confused, her gaze unfocused. Then her eyes found his face, and he saw recognition dawn. Fear and shock passed across her features, followed by something deeper, more painful. "Adrian." Her voice was just a whisper, hoarse from illness and disuse. Tears sprang to her tired eyes, tracking down her temples to disappear into her hair. Adrian wanted to wipe them away, to hold her and never let go, but he remained frozen, caught in the intensity of her gaze. They stared at each other, 7 years of loss and questions hanging in the space between them. Emily's lips moved as if she would speak again, but a harsh cough interrupted her, shaking her weakened body. The steady beeping of the monitors filled the room as Emily's eyes darted around rapidly, confusion and fear etched on her face. Her thin fingers clutched at the hospital sheets and she tried to sit up, but her debilitated body betrayed her. Even the simple movement seemed to drain what little strength she had left. Adrian moved quickly, his hand gentle but firm as he pressed her shoulder back against the pillows. "You're safe," he said, his voice laden with emotion he could barely control. "But I need answers, Emily." His words, though soft, carried the weight of 7 years of questions. Emily flinched at his touch, turning her face away. The oxygen mask fogged with her rapid breathing, and tears continued to stream down her pale cheeks. She looked so fragile, so different from the vibrant woman he remembered that it made his chest ache. Before Adrian could say more, the twins burst into the room, their small feet pattering against the tile floor. They rushed to their mother's bedside opposite Adrian, their faces alight with relief and concern. "Mommy, don't cry," Daisy pleaded, her small hand finding Emily's. Belle grasped the other hand, both girls clinging as if they feared their mother might slip away. Emily's eyes softened at the sight of her daughters, and some of the tension left her body. "My girls," she whispered through the mask, her voice raspy and weak. "I'm okay." Adrian watched the interaction, his heart twisting at the evident love between mother and daughters. He had missed so much, 7 years of memories he should have been part of, stolen from him. The fury growing inside him battled with his need to be gentle, to not frighten Emily more than she already was. "The doctors say you need to rest," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But Emily, I spent 7 years thinking you were dead. I buried an empty coffin. I mourned for you." He paused, struggling to maintain his composure. "I deserve to know what happened." Emily's eyes met his, and the pain he saw there made his heart stop for a moment. She raised trembling fingers and pushed aside the oxygen mask despite Adrian's concerned look. "The girls?" she whispered, glancing at the twins. Adrian understood what Emily wanted to say. Whatever she needed to tell him, she didn't want her daughters to hear it. He pressed the call button, and within moments a nurse appeared. "Could you take the girls to get something to eat?" he requested, his tone making it clear it wasn't really a question. The nurse nodded, understanding the situation. "No," protested Daisy, clutching Emily's hand tighter. "We want to stay with Mommy." Emily squeezed their hands weakly. "It's all right, my loves. I'm not going anywhere, I promise." Her voice was almost a whisper, but it seemed to calm the girls. "Go, get something to eat. You must be hungry." Belle, always the more observant twin, looked between her mother and Adrian. Something in her young face showed understanding beyond her years. She tugged at her sister's sleeve. "Come on, Daisy. Mommy needs to talk to him." The nurse led the reluctant twins out, leaving Adrian and Emily alone with the rhythmic sound of the monitors. Emily seemed to shrink without her daughter's presence, as if they gave her strength. "Your father," Adrian said quietly, finally putting together the pieces. "It was him who did this." Emily closed her eyes, a single tear tracking down her face. When she spoke, her voice was broken, laden with years of pain. "He hated you. Said you weren't worthy of the Laurent name, that you were beneath us." She had to stop to catch her breath. "He gave me an ultimatum, leave you, or he would destroy everything you'd built." Adrian's hands closed into fists, but he forced himself to relax them when he saw Emily's frightened look. "You didn't leave me." "I couldn't," she whispered. "I loved you too much. So he took matters into his own hands." Her voice trembled. "The night of the accident, my driver was working for him. The tea I drank was drugged. I remember the car stopping, then nothing until I woke up in a private clinic." Every word was like a knife to Adrian's chest. He remembered that night, the police at his door, the wreckage, the body they said was unrecognizable, all a carefully orchestrated lie. "I was sedated for months," Emily continued, her voice growing weaker, "when I managed to escape." She placed her hand over her stomach, remembering. "I was pregnant. No money, no home, nowhere to go. And I knew if he found me, he would take them from me. Adrian leaned forward, his voice urgent. Why didn't you come to me? I would have protected you, protected them. Emily's eyes filled with fresh tears. He had people everywhere, his influence. You don't understand how far it reaches. Every time I thought I was safe, his men would appear. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't let him take my babies. Her voice broke on the last word. So I ran. I kept running. Shelters, temporary jobs, always looking over my shoulder. The girls have never had a real home because of me. The monitor showed Emily's increasing heart rate, and Adrian gently replaced the oxygen mask. Breathe, he ordered softly, though his own body trembled with rage. The thought of Emily alone, pregnant and afraid, while he lived in his mansion, drowning in whiskey and self-pity, was unbearable. I'll make him pay, Adrian growled, his voice low and threatening. Everything he did to you, to us, to our daughters, he'll pay for all of it. Emily's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. No, she said through the mask, her eyes wide with fear. I don't want revenge, Adrian. I just want my daughters to be safe. Her strength diminished, the brief surge of energy fading. Please. It's all I've ever wanted. Adrian looked at her. Really, looked. Behind the illness and exhaustion, he saw the same strength that had made him fall in love with her. Then his gaze drifted to the door, where the twins were peeking in, clearly having escaped the nurse. They quickly ducked back out of sight, but the image stayed with him. The fury in his chest transformed into something else, something deeper, more determined. He had more than just a woman to fight for now. He had a family, 2 little girls, who shared his blood, who had Emily's eyes and her determination, and he would protect them all, at any cost. Sometime later, the hospital room hummed with the soft rhythm of medical equipment, a constant backdrop to the quiet breathing of the sleeping twins. Daisy and Belle were curled together on the soft couch Adrian had brought in, sharing a fluffy blanket that seemed enormous on their small bodies. The sight of them made his chest tighten. His daughters, a miracle he never knew he had. Adrian sat in the chair beside Emily's bed, his posture rigid despite hours of vigil. The soft lighting of the private suite cast gentle shadows across Emily's face, making her appear even more fragile than she already was. His eyes never left her, as if he feared she might vanish the moment he looked away. Emily stirred, her eyelashes fluttering against her pale cheeks before slowly opening. For a long moment she simply watched him, her gaze heavy with exhaustion and something deeper. Years of longing, of fear, of survival. The weight of all they had lost hung between them like a physical presence. I thought I'd lost you forever, Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion. The words seemed to scrape in his throat, carrying 7 years of pain. Emily's fingers twisted in the hospital blanket. How could she respond to that? She had lost him too. Lost everything she knew or loved except for the precious gifts growing inside her at the time. She had spent countless nights dreaming of him, wondering if he had moved on, if he was happy, if he was safe. Even while running, even while struggling to keep her daughters fed and warm, she had never stopped loving him. The silence between them was laden with unspoken words and shared pain. Morning brought the doctor's visit with his clipboard full of notes about Emily's condition. He spoke in measured tones about her recovery, recommending she remain under medical care for at least a few more days. The pneumonia is responding well to treatment, he explained, but her body needs time to recover from prolonged malnutrition and stress. Before the doctor had even finished speaking, Adrian was already making arrangements. She'll stay in this private suite for as long as necessary, he stated in a tone that brooked no argument. I want round-the-clock nursing care, the best specialists, everything she needs. Adrian, please, Emily protested weakly from the bed. This is too much. I can't. You can, and you will, he interrupted, his voice softer but still firm. He approached her bed, his presence both imposing and protective. You're not alone anymore, Emily. You don't have to face everything by yourself. Let me take care of you, of all of you. The twins watched the exchange from the couch, their small heads together as they whispered and observed. Throughout the day, they began to cautiously approach Adrian, driven by curiosity but held back by years of learned distrust. They sat near him without touching, their identical blue eyes, his eyes, studying him carefully. "He's very tall," Daisy whispered to Belle, loud enough for Adrian to hear. "Like a tree," Belle solemnly agreed, making Adrian's lips twitch despite himself. They were trying to understand this man, this stranger who looked nothing like them except for those striking blue eyes. This man who had suddenly become central to their small world. Adrian found himself equally fascinated by them, noting Belle's reflective quietness and Daisy's almost boundless energy. When dinner arrived, specially prepared meals by Adrian's personal chef, he watched as the girls' eyes widened at the abundance of food. They ate with a careful quickness that betrayed many missed meals, many nights not knowing where the next day's food would come from. Adrian's jaw clenched as he observed them, his heart aching with the evidence of the hardships they had faced. He stepped out briefly to make a call to his household staff. "I want the kitchen stocked with everything they might like," he instructed. "Fresh fruits, those little cookies they enjoyed at lunch, chocolate milk, whatever they want, whenever they want. They're never going hungry again." As night fell, the hospital suite sank into silence. The twins had fallen asleep watching cartoons on the large TV Adrian had installed, their little faces finally peaceful. Adrian was dozing in his chair when a sudden gasp awakened him. Emily was sitting up in bed, breathing with difficulty, her eyes wide with terror. Her hands clutched the blanket so tightly her knuckles were white, and beads of sweat trickled down her forehead despite the cool temperature of the room. Adrian was at her side in an instant, his hand finding hers in the darkness. He didn't speak, didn't press her to explain, just held her hand, offering his strength, his presence, his silent promise that she was no longer alone. Emily's breathing gradually calmed, though tremors still ran through her body. The images from the nightmare persisted, her father's cold face as he ordered her locked away, endless nights fleeing with her daughters, the constant fear of being found. But for the first time in 7 years, she didn't have to face these demons alone in the dark. Adrian's hand was warm and solid in hers, an anchor in the storm of her memories. He sat on the edge of the bed, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm, and Emily felt something inside her begin to heal, slowly, tentatively, but unmistakably. The monitors beeped softly in the background. The twins slept peacefully on the couch, and in the dark quiet of the hospital room, Emily allowed herself to lean on Adrian's strength. Just a little, just enough to remember what it felt like to feel safe. Days later, the sun had barely risen when Adrian settled into his office, his desk already covered with documents and reports. The weight of everything he had discovered in the past few days pressed down on him, fueling his determination to uncover every detail of Emily's disappearance. His private investigators were the best money could buy, but waiting for answers was torture. The office was silent except for the soft ticking of the antique clock and the occasional rustling of papers. Adrian's fingers drummed on the mahogany desk while his other hand held a cup of coffee that had gone cold long ago. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his sleepless night, but his gaze remained sharp and focused. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called, straightening in his chair. His assistant Sarah entered with a thick manila folder clutched to her chest, her expression grim. "Sir, the preliminary findings you requested about Mr. Laurent's activities 7 years ago." Adrian's jaw clenched as he took the folder. "Thank you, Sarah. That will be all." As soon as he was alone, he opened the folder and began to read. With each page, his grip on the papers grew tighter, his knuckles turning white. The evidence was laid out in meticulous detail. Falsified death certificates with official stamps, medical records documenting injuries that never existed, bank statements showing substantial payments to various officials and medical staff. Emily's father had created an elaborate web of lies, using his wealth and influence to erase any trace of his daughter's existence. The car accident had been staged with precision, including planted DNA evidence. The private facility where Emily had been kept was registered under a shell company, its records buried beneath layers of corporate bureaucracy. Adrian's hand trembled as he reached the section detailing the bribes. The amounts were shocking even by his standards: hospital administrators, police officers, coroners. Laurent had bought them all, ensuring no one questioned the story of Emily's death. A wave of fury rose in Adrian's chest, hot and overwhelming. The coffee cup shattered in his hand, spilling the lukewarm liquid across the desk and documents. He barely noticed the mess or the sharp cut of the ceramic on his palm. Hours passed as he delved deeper into the investigation. When he finally arrived at Emily's hospital room, his anger had crystallized into something cold and dangerous. Emily was awake, propped up on the pillows while the twins played quietly with some new toys on the couch. The moment she saw his face, she knew. 7 years apart hadn't diminished her ability to read him. She recognized the fierce, protective anger burning in his eyes, the same look he'd had years ago whenever someone threatened what he loved. "Adrian," she said softly, concern marking her forehead. He tried to soften his expression for the sake of the girls, but his voice remained tense with controlled fury. "I know what he did. All of it." Emily's face paled. She glanced at the twins, then back to Adrian. "Please," she whispered. "Don't do anything rash. He's still powerful. He can hurt us, hurt them." Adrian moved to her bed, taking her hands. His touch was gentle despite the anger consuming him. "He won't get near you," he promised, his voice low and intense. "I'll make sure of it. No one is going to hurt you or our daughters ever again." Throughout the day, as Adrian moved between his office and Emily's room, he became aware of 2 small shadows following him. Daisy and Belle had begun trailing him around the house, hiding behind furniture or in corners whenever he looked their way. Their giggles always gave them away, but Adrian pretended not to notice, understanding their need to observe him on their own terms. At one point, he spotted them peeking from behind a doorframe, their identical blue eyes wide with curiosity. He kept his expression carefully neutral, continuing his conversation with the security team while secretly watching their reactions. The girls whispered to each other, studying his movements, his expressions, the way others responded to him. As night approached, Adrian arranged for the twins to be taken to a specially prepared room near Emily's. He had furnished it that afternoon: 2 small princess canopy beds, soft nightlights, and shelves already filled with books and toys. The girls' eyes had widened when they first saw the room, their small hands holding each other as they absorbed the magical space. Now, as Adrian tucked them in, making sure each had her favorite stuffed animal, discovered through careful observation, Belle's small voice broke the silence. "Are you really our daddy?" Adrian's heart clenched. He knelt between their beds, bringing himself to their eye level. "Yes," he answered simply, his voice soft, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. There was a moment of silence before Daisy spoke, her voice even softer than her sister's. "Will you go away like all the other grown-ups?" The question hit Adrian like a physical blow. He thought of all the times these precious girls must have been uprooted, all the people who had entered and left their lives as Emily struggled to keep them safe. His throat tightened with emotion. "No, sweetheart," he whispered, smoothing Daisy's hair. "I'm never going anywhere." For an instant, nothing happened. Then, as if they had made a silent decision together, both girls reached out their arms at the same time, wrapping them around his neck. Adrian embraced them, holding his daughters for the first time, and felt something in his heart shift and settle into place. Some time later, Emily walked the grand corridors of Adrian's mansion, her fingers trailing along the polished mahogany walls. Each step brought back memories that made her heart ache. The marble floors still gleamed like mirrors, reflecting the crystal chandeliers that hung from the ceiling. The soft light cast dancing shadows on the elegant wallpaper, exactly as it had 7 years ago. She paused at the grand staircase, her hand resting on the smooth banister. How many times had she descended these steps dressed for dinner or a charity gala? How many times had Adrian waited at the bottom, his eyes lighting up at the sight of her? The memories now seemed like scenes from someone else's life. The mansion was exactly as she remembered, yet somehow different. Perhaps it wasn't the house that had changed, but she herself. The woman who once moved confidently through these corridors no longer existed, replaced by someone who felt like an intruder in her own past. Her feet carried her down familiar hallways until she found herself outside Adrian's office. The heavy oak door was ajar and the smell of leather and old books hung in the air. Emily hesitated before pushing it open. The room was a true time capsule. The same leather armchairs flanked the fireplace, the same antique desk dominated the back wall, and the same collection of family photos adorned the bookshelves. One particular frame caught her attention. Emily crossed the room and picked up the silver frame with trembling hands. The photograph showed her and Adrian at their engagement party. She wore a blue dress that matched his eyes, and his arm was wrapped protectively around her waist. Their smiles were radiant, full of hope and promises for the future they thought they would have together. "I can't believe you still have this," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Her finger traced the edge of the frame, remembering how happy they had been that night. She didn't hear Adrian approach, but she felt his presence behind her. "I never stopped waiting for you, Emily," he said softly. The raw emotion in Adrian's voice made Emily's chest tighten. She carefully placed the photo back, afraid her trembling hands might drop it. Adrian gestured to one of the leather armchairs. "Sit with me, Emily." Emily nodded, sinking into the familiar comfort of the chair. Adrian sat in the opposite chair, exactly as they had done countless times before. The fireplace between them remained cold and dark, like the years that had separated them. "I tried to move on," Adrian began, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I threw myself into work, built the company larger than I ever imagined. But nothing filled the void." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made Emily's heart ache. "I'd see something that reminded me of you, or catch the scent of your favorite perfume on a stranger, and it was like losing you all over again." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Every night when I put the girls to bed, I'd whisper your name to them," she confessed. "I'd tell stories about their father, how brave and kind he was, how much he would have loved them if he had known them." She wiped her cheeks. "I always hoped that somehow, someday, you'd find us. If I had known." Adrian's hands closed into fists. "If I'd had any idea you were out there." "I know," Emily said softly. "I wanted to reach out so many times, but every time I thought about it, I remembered my father's threats. He said he would take the girls away if I contacted you." She shuddered at the memory. "I couldn't risk losing them. They were all I had left of you." The tension between them was palpable, laden with 7 years of unspoken words and buried feelings. The love that had bound them was still there, burning as intensely as before, but now it was intertwined with pain, fear, and the weight of all they had lost. Adrian leaned forward in his chair. "Do you remember what I told you the day I proposed?" Emily nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "I promised that nothing would ever separate us," he continued. "I failed to keep that promise once. I won't fail again." "Adrian," Emily's voice faltered, "everything's different now. We're different people." "Are we?" He stood and knelt beside her chair. "My heart still stops when you walk into a room. I still know exactly how you like your coffee, how you curl up with a book on rainy days, how your nose crinkles when you're trying not to laugh." His blue eyes found hers. 7 years haven't changed what I feel for you, Emily." Later that night, after tucking the twins into their new beds, Emily found herself back in Adrian's office. He had lit a fire, and the flames cast a welcoming glow throughout the room. She sat on the soft rug before the fireplace, wrapped in memories of countless evenings spent just like this. Adrian joined her, offering a glass of wine. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire dance and listening to the soft crackling of burning wood. Emily turned to look at him, absorbing the familiar lines of his profile. "I don't know how to be with you again," she admitted softly. The words carried all her fears, all her insecurities about the years that had passed and the people they had become. Adrian set his wine glass aside and gently took her hand. His touch was warm and firm, exactly as she remembered. "Then let's figure it out together," he said softly. The next morning, sunlight painted golden stripes across the mansion's entrance as Adrian helped Daisy and Belle into the car. Their eyes widened at the leather seats and the way the doors closed. With a soft, expensive sound, everything about the vehicle spoke of a luxury they had never known. "Where are we going?" Daisy asked, bouncing slightly in her seat as Adrian adjusted her seatbelt. "It's a surprise," Adrian responded, a gentle smile on his lips. He met Emily's gaze as she stood in the doorway wrapped in a soft cardigan. "We won't be long." The drive into the city was filled with the twins' animated chatter, pressing their faces against the windows, pointing at everything they passed. Adrian found himself answering a flurry of questions about buildings, trees, and even traffic lights. Their curiosity touched something deep inside him. The first stop was at the local ice cream parlor, a charming shop with a striped awning and gleaming display cases. The girls' faces lit up at the sight of the colorful array of flavors before them. "You can each choose 2 scoops," Adrian said, watching as they clutched each other's hands and whispered excitedly. Belle chose strawberry and vanilla, while Daisy opted for chocolate and mint chocolate chip. Adrian helped them carry the enormous cones to a table outside with napkins at the ready. The simple joy on their faces as they tasted the ice cream tugged at his heart. When Daisy's ice cream began dripping down her chin, Adrian automatically grabbed a napkin, gently wiping the small girl's face. She didn't shy away from his touch. Instead, she gave him a chocolate-stained smile that melted his heart. The next stop was the toy store, where the twins stood awestruck at the entrance, their eyes as wide as saucers. Adrian knelt between them. "Go ahead," he encouraged. "Choose whatever you want." They wandered the aisles slowly, touching everything with reverent fingers. Belle was drawn to the art supplies, while Daisy became enchanted with a display of stuffed animals. Adrian followed, carrying their growing collection of treasures. What touched him most was how they checked the price of everything, whispering to each other about choosing smaller items. Even so young, they understood the value of money all too well. Adrian made sure they knew they no longer needed to worry about that. From a distance, Emily observed it all unfold. She had followed in her own car, keeping back but unable to resist watching this moment. Her heart swelled seeing Adrian kneel to tie Belle's loose shoelace, his large hands gentle as he made a double knot. The way he lifted Daisy onto his shoulders when she grew tired, her small hands resting confidently on his head, brought tears to her eyes. As the afternoon progressed, Emily witnessed countless small moments that proved what she had always known. In her heart, Adrian was meant to be their father. He seemed to instinctively know when to step in and when to let them explore on their own. His patience never wavered, even when Daisy accidentally knocked over a stack of blocks or when Belle took 10 minutes to choose between 2 coloring books. That evening, after the girls were engrossed with their new toys under the watchful eye of Adrian's most trusted housekeeper, he surprised Emily with dinner. He led her to a private dining room she remembered well, where candles flickered on the table and soft music played in the background. "Just the 2 of us tonight," he said softly, pulling out her chair for her to sit. Emily settled in, touched by the familiar gesture. The table was decorated with her favorite flowers, white roses, and the wine was from the same vintage they used to share. "I want you to feel at home here again," Adrian said as they began their meal. "In this house, in this life." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I know things can't go back to exactly how they were. Too much has happened. But I want to try to build something new, something that includes all the parts of who we are now." Emily took a sip of wine, letting its warmth calm her nerves. "Sometimes it feels like a dream," she admitted. "Being here again, seeing you with the girls." She smiled softly. "You're so natural with them." "They make it easy," Adrian responded. "They're extraordinary children, Emily. You did an amazing job raising them alone." The morning light filtered, through the tall windows of Adrian's mansion, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Adrian sat behind his desk, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and reports. His laptop screen displayed emails from renowned lawyers across the country, each carefully selected for their expertise in family law and reputation for handling difficult cases. Emily paced back and forth in the office, hugging herself tightly. The elegant silk blouse and tailored pants Adrian had bought for her felt like a disguise. Inside, she still felt like the woman who had spent years running and hiding. "We'll file for immediate and exclusive custody," Adrian explained, his voice firm and confident. "Your father's actions, the false death certificate, the illegal detention, all of it will be exposed. No judge would grant him rights after learning what he did." Emily stopped pacing and turned to him, her face pale. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Legal means won't stop him." She approached Adrian's desk, placing her palms on the surface and leaning forward. "He plays dirty. Laws, ethics, morality, none of it means anything to him. He'll find a way around everything." Adrian stood up, coming around the desk to stand beside her. His hand found the small of her back warm and reassuring. "I'm ready for whatever fight he brings, Emily. I've spent years building my own empire, my own connections. I'm not the same man he pushed away all those years ago." "But," Emily began to protest, but was interrupted by a sharp knock on the office door. Adrian's assistant, Sarah, entered. Her face was unusually pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she held her tablet. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her voice shaking. Before either of them could respond, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway behind Sarah. Richard. Laurent stood there in an impeccable charcoal gray suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his cold eyes taking in the scene before him. He was exactly as Emily remembered, powerful, controlled, and completely devoid of warmth. "Emily, darling," Richard said smoothly, as if greeting her at a casual Sunday brunch, as if he hadn't destroyed her life, hadn't torn her from everything she loved. "You're looking well." Emily felt Adrian tense beside her, his hand moving from her back to grip hers firmly. She fought against the urge to hide behind him, to shield herself from her father's calculating gaze. "Get out." Adrian's voice was low and dangerous. Richard smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. He entered the office as if he owned it, settling uninvited into one of the leather armchairs. Now, Adrian. Is that any way to treat your future father-in-law?" "Oh, wait." His smile turned cruel. "We made sure that never happened, didn't we?" Emily's free hand clenched into a fist. "Why are you here?" "Business, of course." Richard reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a thick envelope, placing it on Adrian's desk. "My lawyers will be filing these documents today. I'm seeking full custody of Daisy and Belle." The world seemed to spin beneath Emily's feet. Only Adrian's grip on her hand kept her standing. "You what?" Adrian's voice was deadly calm. Richard's expression became sympathetic, but his eyes remained cold. "Emily has proven herself incapable of caring for the children, living in shelters, unable to provide adequate nutrition or medical care. The evidence speaks for itself. The courts will see that the girls deserve better." Adrian laughed then, a sound completely devoid of humor. "You faked your daughter's death," he said, each word precise and cutting. "You left your own grandchildren to live in poverty, and now you think you can take them from her?" "I did what was necessary," Richard replied calmly. Emily needed to understand her place in the world. Unfortunately, she chose to run instead of learning her lesson. But now, he opened his hands, we have the chance to correct this mistake. Emily found her voice, though it trembled with anger. "You will not take my children." "Our children," Adrian added firmly. Richard leaned forward in the chair, his voice lowering to a warning whisper. "I always win, Adrian. Always. I took her from you once. I can do it again." Emily's grip on Adrian's hand intensified until her knuckles turned white. She wouldn't let her father destroy her life again. She wouldn't let him near her daughters. "Get out of my house," Adrian said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Richard rose slowly, deliberately buttoning his suit jacket. "Think about what's best for the girls," he said, his voice laden with false concern. "Do you really want them growing up in the middle of an ugly legal battle?" Neither Emily nor Adrian responded, watching in tense silence as Richard headed toward the office door. He paused there, glancing through the open door to where Daisy and Belle were playing in the room next door. The twins were completely immersed in their game, oblivious to the threat just meters away. Richard's lips curled into a smirk. "Enjoy them while you can." Emily trembled with anger as she watched her father walk away, his expensive shoes echoing on the hardwood floor. Adrian stood beside her, his body rigid with contained fury, eyes fixed on Richard's figure until he disappeared from view. The sound of the front door closing reverberated through the mansion like a gunshot. Emily's legs finally gave way, and she sank into the nearest chair. Adrian immediately knelt beside her, holding her face in his hands. "Look at me," he said firmly. "He will never touch them. Never." Through the office door they could hear Daisy and Belle laughing, the pure, innocent sound completely unaware of the darkness threatening their happiness. Emily turned her head to watch them, her precious daughters who had already been through so much. Adrian followed her gaze, his jaw set with determination. They remained there in silence, watching their daughters play, both silently promising that Richard Laurent would never lay hands on their family. The morning sun cast a golden glow over Adrian's property as he walked the perimeter with his head of security, James. The muscular ex-military man pointed out the new security measures being installed, additional cameras, motion sensors, and reinforced gates. "We've doubled the patrol shifts," James explained, gesturing to two guards making their rounds. "Every entrance is monitored 24/7. We've installed panic buttons throughout the house." Adrian nodded, his eyes scanning the grounds with calculated precision. "And the background checks on all staff?" "Complete and thorough, sir. Everyone has been vetted twice." Inside the mansion, Emily watched through the window as Adrian discussed security details. Her heart ached to see their peaceful reunion so quickly transformed into an exercise in fortification. But she understood the necessity. Richard Laurent never made empty threats. The sound of small feet running across the hardwood floor caught her attention. Daisy and Belle came running into the room, their matching summer dresses swinging around their knees. "Mommy, can we go outside?" Daisy asked, her blue eyes, so much like Adrian's, shining with hope. "It's so pretty today." Emily looked outside, again. Adrian was now speaking with a distinguished-looking woman in a tailored suit, Catherine Wells, one of the country's leading family lawyers. They had spent hours yesterday discussing strategies, building their case against Richard. But, looking at her daughter's eager faces, Emily made a decision. They couldn't let fear rule their lives. The girls deserved normalcy, joy, and sunshine. When Adrian entered, Emily suggested a picnic in the gardens. His face immediately softened, the business mask disappearing. "Perfect idea," he said, reaching for his phone to cancel his afternoon meetings. An hour later, they spread a checkered blanket on a sunny patch of grass surrounded by flower beds in full bloom. The mansion's kitchen staff had prepared an elaborate feast, fresh sandwiches, fruits, homemade cookies, and lemonade. Belle giggled as she bit into a strawberry, the juice running down her chin. Adrian automatically reached for a napkin, cleaning her face with such care that it made Emily's heart tighten in her chest. "Look, butterflies!" Daisy jumped up, pointing to the colorful insects fluttering through the garden. The two girls ran off, their laughter echoing across the grounds. Adrian watched the girls with a look of enchantment. "I never thought I'd have this," he said softly. Emily reached out and squeezed his hand. "Neither did I." They spent the afternoon in the sun-drenched garden, allowing the girls to explore every corner. Adrian taught them how to make daisy chains, his large hands surprisingly deft at intertwining the delicate flowers. The sight of him wearing a daisy crown placed there by his giggling daughters made Emily's heart feel too big for her chest. As the day progressed, the girls' energy finally began to wane. They cuddled on the blanket with their heads resting on Adrian's legs as he read them a story from a book they'd brought outside. Emily watched them, memorizing every detail, the way Adrian's voice changed for different characters, how Belle's thumb found its way to her mouth as she drifted off to sleep, the peaceful expression on Daisy's face as she nestled closer to her father. This was what Richard threatened to take away, this precious, perfect peace they had finally found. Later that night, after the twins were tucked into bed, Emily wandered the silent corridors of the mansion. She found herself outside Adrian's office where light still spilled from beneath the door despite the late hour. She opened the door quietly. Adrian was seated at his desk, surrounded by legal documents and security reports. His shoulders were tense, his jaw clenched as he studied the papers before him. Without a word, Emily walked to behind his chair. She placed her hands on his shoulders, feeling the knots of tension beneath her fingers. Slowly, carefully, she began to massage the rigid muscles. Adrian stiffened for a moment but gradually relaxed under her touch. "You always take care of everyone," she whispered, working out a particularly tight knot. "Who takes care of you?" Adrian closed his eyes and leaned back into her hands. The simple act of surrender, of allowing her to care for him, seeming more intimate than any kiss could be. Emily continued her gentle caresses, feeling years of tension beneath her fingers. For how long had he carried this weight alone? How many nights had he spent in this office buried in work to avoid the emptiness of his life? "I missed you," Adrian murmured, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Every day, every moment. I missed you so much it felt like dying." Emily's hands paused, for an instant as tears sprang to her eyes. Then she resumed the massage, putting all her unspoken feelings into her caring touch. Adrian raised one of her hands and brought it to his lips. The soft kiss he placed on her palm made her heart race. The office was lit only by Adrian's desk lamp and a few scattered candles, his preference for working late into the night. The flickering light cast dancing shadows on the walls as Emily slowly moved to stand beside his chair. For a long moment they just looked at each other, years of pain, longing, and love passing between them in silence. Then hesitantly Emily extended her hand and took Adrian's. He squeezed it firmly as if afraid she might vanish if he let go. His thumb traced circles on her skin, the simple touch saying more than words could express. They didn't need to speak. In the quiet, candlelit room with their fingers intertwined, Emily finally allowed herself to believe in them again, not just as parents to their daughters, but as Adrian and Emily, two hearts that had never truly stopped beating for each other. The morning light streamed through the high windows of Adrian's mansion, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Daisy and Belle, already dressed in matching blue dresses that Emily had chosen, tiptoed through the silent corridors. Their natural curiosity had led them to explore every corner of their new home over the past few days, but Adrian's office remained, a mysterious territory they had yet to fully investigate. They peeked around the corner, watching Adrian stride down the hallway toward the kitchen with his phone pressed to his ear, discussing business matters. As soon as he disappeared from view, the twins exchanged mischievous looks. "Come on," Daisy whispered, taking her sister's hand. They slipped into the office, their small feet silent on the thick carpet. The room smelled of leather and old books, with morning light filtering through the heavy curtains. Belle ran her fingers along the leather-bound volumes while Daisy went straight to Adrian's massive desk. "Look at all these drawers," said Daisy, pulling them open one by one. Most opened easily, revealing only papers and office supplies, but when she reached the bottom right drawer, it wouldn't budge. Belle joined her sister, both examining the locked drawer with growing curiosity. "Maybe there's treasure inside," suggested Belle, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Daisy noticed a small key partially hidden under a stack of papers on the desk. Carefully, she picked it up and held it triumphantly. "Let's see if it works." The key fit perfectly in the lock. With a soft click, the drawer opened, revealing several velvet boxes nestled in the back corner. Belle took the smallest one, dark blue and obviously antique but well-preserved. "What is it?" Belle asked, turning the box in her small hands. Daisy, took it from her sister and opened the lid carefully. The two girls gasped as light reflected off the magnificent diamond ring inside. The stone was set in an intricate platinum band surrounded by smaller diamonds that sparkled like captured stars. "It's so beautiful," Belle sighed, leaning in to examine the ring more closely. At that moment, Emily appeared in the doorway. She stopped abruptly, her face losing color as she recognized the box in her daughter's hands. The ring she had never seen but had dreamed about during those months before everything fell apart. Adrian entered right behind her, his tall figure filling the entrance. His eyes immediately fixed on the open velvet box, and something passed across his face. Pain, longing, hope, all mixed into a complex emotion that made his blue eyes darken. The twins, oblivious to the heavy atmosphere that suddenly settled in the room, smiled up at Adrian. Daisy held up the ring, her face lit with innocent excitement. "Are you going to marry Mommy?" Adrian's gaze turned to Emily, and in that moment, he seemed more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. The carefully constructed barriers he maintained, even with her, crumbled completely. His voice was hoarse with emotion when he spoke. "I kept it," he said softly, his eyes never leaving Emily's face. "Because I never stopped wanting a future with you." Emily's eyes filled with tears as the weight of his words settled over her. The ring represented everything they had lost, and everything they might still have. All the dreams that were stolen from them, all the years they should have shared, crystallized in that single piece of jewelry. With a heart full of love and regret, Emily moved toward Adrian, the twins watching with wide eyes as their mother rested her forehead against their father's, their bodies naturally drawing together. Like planets orbiting the sun, Emily's lips parted, words of love and promises forming on her tongue. But before she could speak, Adrian's phone vibrated abruptly in his pocket, breaking the intimate moment. He pulled it out, his face hardening as he saw who was calling. Putting it on speaker, he answered, "Catherine, what is it?" His lawyer's clear, incisive voice sounded, "It's happening. Richard Laurent just filed for an emergency custody hearing." The tenderness of the previous moment evaporated instantly. Adrian gripped the phone tightly, his knuckles turning white, as a cold fury took over his expression. "Then we end this," he responded, his voice like ice. The twins, still holding the velvet box between them, looked up at their parents with confusion and concern. Emily quickly moved to them, embracing them while the determination in Adrian's jaw clenched tighter. Morning shadows stretched across the courthouse steps as Adrian and Emily entered, followed closely by their legal team. Emily's heart pounded against her ribs, her fingers intertwined firmly with Adrian's as they walked through the imposing marble corridors. Behind them, they'd left the twins with Adrian's most trusted staff, not wanting them to witness this battle. The courtroom doors loomed ahead, heavy and dark. Emily paused, taking a deep breath. Adrian turned to her, his blue eyes filled with determination. "Remember," he said softly, "he can't hurt you anymore. We have the truth on our side." Inside the courtroom, Richard Laurent sat at the opposite table, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his silver hair impeccably groomed. He exuded absolute confidence, surrounded by a team of equally expensive attorneys. When he caught Emily's eye, his lips curved into a knowing smile that made her stomach turn. Adrian guided Emily to their table, where Catherine Wells, their lead attorney, waited with organized files spread before her. The polished wooden surface reflected the fluorescent lights above, and Emily focused on its smoothness to calm her nerves. "All rise," called the bailiff as Judge Harrison entered the courtroom. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, took her seat and surveyed the room with watchful eyes. "Be seated. We're here for an emergency hearing regarding custody of minors Daisy and Belle Laurent." Hours later, Emily watched in disbelief as her father was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, his empire crumbling around him. The evidence Adrian had gathered was overwhelming. Falsified death certificates, blackmail, bribery, all exposed before the judge and now headed to criminal court. Adrian stood beside Emily, his arm protectively around her waist as the judge finalized her ruling. Custody is granted permanently to the natural parents, Emily Laurent and Adrian Cole. Outside under the bright afternoon sky, Belle tugged on Adrian's sleeve, her little face serious. "So that means you're really our daddy forever?" Adrian immediately knelt, bringing himself to the twins' eye level. Daisy moved closer, too, awaiting his answer with the same anxious expression as her sister. "Forever and always," Adrian promised, his voice thick with emotion. "Nothing will ever change that." Their faces lit up with pure joy as they launched, themselves at him simultaneously, squealing with delight as he caught them and lifted them into the air, their little legs swinging with excitement. Their laughter echoed across the courthouse steps while Emily watched, tears streaming down her face. After years of struggling alone, trying to give her daughters enough love to make up for everything they lacked, she finally saw them experience the complete unconditional love of both parents for the first time. She allowed herself to believe in happiness again,